welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be looking into a case that really shook up the internet a while back. And it sparks a whole lot of conversations about online culture and, the power of what we believe, and also where the line is between fantasy and reality. Back in 2014, two 12-year-old girls, their names were Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, they attempted to harm their friend Payton Leutner. This all happened in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And their reason? Well, they said they were being forced by this internet legend, Slender Man.
Yeah, this case is really, really chilling. It shows how online stories can really make their way into the real world, especially when you think about young minds that are, still figuring out how the world works.
Right. So before we get into what happened that day, let's take a step back. Who or what is Slender Man? And how did he end up influencing these two young girls?
Well, Slender Man, he kind of popped up back in 2009. It was from a Photoshop contest on this website called Something Awful. And the interesting thing is he was made up, completely intentional, not like some old myth or anything. The guy who created him, he basically took pictures of kids and messed with them, with Photoshop. And the captions, they hinted that something creepy was going on, like something was making these kids disappear.
So he wasn't some ancient story that's been around forever. He was like brand new from the internet.
Exactly. And the way he looked, it's what made him spread so fast online. This tall, faceless guy in a suit, always lurking in the background of pictures. It played on people's deepest fears, the kind of stuff that just feels wrong. It was like a blank slate for a monster, so people could imagine whatever scared them the most.
And anyone could add to his story, right?
Oh,
with their own pictures and stuff. That's probably why he blew up so fast.
Absolutely. It was like a digital game of telephone, The story kept changing and getting scarier as it went around. And this constantly changing, everyone adding to it thing, that's what sucked Morgan and Anissa in. They weren't just reading the stories, they were adding their own stuff, their own beliefs.
So it was more than just liking scary stories for them. It became like a part of how they saw the world.
Right. They believed Slender Man was real. Not just a story, but an actual being living in the woods near their homes. They thought he had these proxies, people he controlled to do his bidding. And the scariest part, they believed he needed sacrifices, to keep him happy and to protect their families from harm.
It's hard to grasp how those beliefs, coming from the internet, could have such a strong hold on them.
Yeah. And it raises a big question. How do we help young people make sense of all this information online? How do we teach them to tell what's real and what's not, especially when it comes to scary stuff online?
We also have to consider, their friendship. Morgan and Anissa, they were both really into Slender Man. But their friend, Payton, she wasn't so much. Did this shared belief and maybe Payton feeling left out, did that play a part in what happened?
Friendships, especially at that age, are complicated. It's common for one person to feel left out, and that feeling can get worse when the other two are super into something, something that consumes them. Have you ever felt like that, where a shared interest brought two friends closer and kind of pushed someone else away?
Yeah, definitely. Feeling like the odd one out in a group of friends is tough,
Yeah.
especially when you're young and trying to figure out how all that social stuff works. But in this case, it went a really dark direction.
Right. And even though what they did was awful, we got to remember that Morgan and Anissa were still kids. Their brains were still developing, and they didn't fully understand the consequences of their actions. And their grasp on the difference between fantasy and reality, well, that was still forming too.
And sadly, their belief in Slender Man's power led them to plan something terrible, something they thought would please him. They decided to harm Payton as a way to show their loyalty and avoid him coming after them.
The planning involved is really unsettling. They picked a date and wanted to use a sleepover to get Payton alone. Their initial plan was to harm her while she was asleep, but they backed out. Maybe they realized how serious what they were about to do was, at that moment.
So the next morning, they decided to go to a park nearby. They tried to get Payton alone in the bathroom, but again, they couldn't go through with it. It's like the reality of what they were about to do kept hitting them.
It's like they were in this back and forth, between their plan and their hesitation, caught between what they believed about Slender Man and that natural human feeling of not wanting to hurt someone.
In the end, they came up with a chilling plan. They lured Payton into the woods, using hide and seek as an excuse. Anissa gave Morgan a signal, and that's when it happened.
The weapon they chose was a kitchen knife, just an ordinary thing from their everyday lives. It's frightening how easily something normal can be turned into something dangerous.
Payton was left with 19 wounds. It just shows how brutal their actions were. But she was incredibly strong and managed to crawl to safety. A cyclist saw her and called 911 right away. It's amazing she survived.
It really is. Payton's survival shows just how strong the human spirit can be. It's also a reminder that beyond the headlines and the sensationalism, there's a real person who went through something unimaginable. We can't forget that.
You're absolutely right. And when the police interviewed Morgan and Anissa afterwards, it gives a really disturbing insight into how they were thinking. They were both described as being very calm and detached, almost like they were just stating facts about what had happened.
Anissa's words, when she compared what they did to lionesses chasing a zebra, are chilling. It shows how completely their beliefs about Slender Man had changed their view of the world. It wasn't a game to them, it was life or death, something they had to do to protect themselves and their families.
Their fear of Slender Man seemed to be stronger than any understanding of what would happen to them in the real world. It was like they were stuck in a world they created, where what they read online was more real than anything else. But was there more to it than just a shared delusion? Was there something else going on with them individually?
Yeah, that's where the psychological evaluations come in. During the trials, both girls went through a lot of tests and assessments, and what they found was really eye-opening in terms of their mental states.
So it wasn't just about being obsessed with Slender Man together. There was more to it than that.
Definitely. Morgan, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. It's a serious mental illness, and it can make people see and hear things that aren't real and believe things that aren't true, and it can make it hard to think straight. In Morgan's case, she actually said she was seeing Slender Man, so for her, it was like her online obsession and what she thought was real were all mixed up together.
Wow. It's really sad to think about a young girl dealing with such a serious mental illness, especially when you consider she was also going through adolescence and trying to make sense of the online world all at the same time.
It's a tragic reminder that mental illness can happen to anyone, no matter how old they are, and it's so important to get help early on and have support. And even though hallucinations are common with schizophrenia, it's really important to understand that they don't usually lead to violence. Most people with schizophrenia are not dangerous, and in fact, they're more likely to be victims of violence themselves.
That's a really important point to make. Mental illness is often misunderstood, and people can be scared or judgmental. It's so crucial to talk about these things with compassion and understanding. What about Anissa? Did her evaluation show anything specific?
Anissa's diagnosis was really interesting. She was diagnosed with shared psychotic disorder, which is also called folie à deux. Basically, she started believing Morgan's delusions, like they were contagious. It was because they were so close, she ended up convinced that what Morgan believed was real.
So, because they were both so fixated on Slender Man and such good friends, it created the situation where Anissa basically caught Morgan's delusions.
Exactly. Shared psychotic disorder usually happens in close relationships where one person, called the inducer, has a very strong delusion that they already believe. The other person, the induced, then starts to believe it too, especially if they're kind of isolated, easily influenced, or dependent on the inducer. In this case, Morgan's belief in Slender Man was so powerful and their friendship was so intense that Anissa's own sense of reality got warped to match Morgan's.
That's a chilling example of how relationships and the power of belief can lead people to share a distorted view of reality.
Absolutely. And this case makes us think about the importance of critical thinking, understanding the media, and being aware of mental health, especially with the internet, because information, whether it's true or made up, can spread so quickly and easily influence young minds.
It's a lot to unpack, and then you add legal stuff and it gets even more complicated. Both girls were tried as adults, and that decision sparked a lot of debate about the justice system and how it deals with young people who commit crimes. So, what happened in their trials? What were the outcomes? And what does it all mean in the long run?
Well, Morgan was seen as being more caught up in the delusion and more involved in planning the attack. She got a sentence of 40 years in a mental health institution. Anissa, because she was diagnosed with shared psychotic disorder, her role was seen as less serious, and she got 25 years in a similar facility.
Wow, those are really heavy sentences, especially considering they were only 12 years old when it happened. It makes you think about all the ethical and legal questions, about responsibility, rehabilitation, and what justice really means when you're dealing with kids, especially when mental illness is involved.
You're right, there's a lot to consider. The debate about whether to try kids as adults is still going on, and this case definitely brings those arguments to the forefront. It forces us to think about what it means to be truly responsible for your actions, how to balance punishment with helping someone become a better person, and how to keep everyone safe, the people involved, and society as a whole.
It's so important to think about Payton in all of this. Her story and her incredible recovery deserve our attention and respect. What can you tell us about how she's doing after such a traumatic experience?
Peyton's recovery has been and continues to be a really long and difficult journey, but she's shown so much courage and resilience in the face of something unimaginable. She had to have multiple surgeries, physical therapy, and she's still getting emotional and psychological support to help her deal with everything that happened. She's even talked publicly about her struggles with PTSD, the nightmares, and the constant fear that haunted her for years.
It's a powerful reminder that the impact goes far beyond the physical injuries. The emotional scars, the feeling of being betrayed by her friends, and the constant struggle to feel safe again, those wounds can run incredibly deep and take a long time to heal.
Absolutely. Peyton's story shows how strong the human spirit is, how we can heal and keep going, but it also shows how devastating and lasting violence can be, especially when it happens at such a young age. One detail that really stuck with me was that Peyton slept with scissors under her pillow for years after the attack. It just shows how vulnerable and scared she felt, even after all that time.
It's heartbreaking. It reminds us that this isn't just some sensational story. It's about real people whose lives were changed forever by this tragedy.
You're right. This case deserves our empathy, our understanding, and our commitment to learning from all the factors that led to this horrific event.
And even though Peyton is on a path to healing, we can't forget that this case inspired other disturbing incidents. There were copycat attacks influenced by Slender Man, which just shows how much power the internet has to affect behavior, especially among young people who are easily influenced and have trouble separating online fantasy from real-life consequences.
That's a crucial point. This case is a wake-up call to the potential dangers of online culture, especially when you mix it with mental health issues. It shows how important it is to talk openly about internet safety, being smart about what we see and read online, and knowing when to ask for help for ourselves or others who are struggling with their mental health.
It's complicated, but it's something we need to pay attention to and be willing to talk about, even when it's hard.
So, where are Morgan and Anissa now? Have there been any updates on their situations?
Well, in 2021, a judge decided that Anissa was no longer a danger to herself or others, so she was given conditional release from the mental health institution. She's still getting mental health treatment and being monitored as part of her release agreement. I bet that decision was incredibly difficult. Trying to balance rehabilitation with keeping the public safe and making sure Anissa still gets the help she needs.
It definitely was. It highlights the challenges of dealing with mental health, the justice system, and the long-term effects of things that happen during adolescence.
What about Morgan? Is she still in the institution?
Yes, she is, but she can ask to be released every 6 months. Her case is still being reviewed, and they look at her progress with her mental health, if she's a danger to herself or others, and if there's enough support for her if she's released. It's a reminder that this story isn't over, and what happened back in 2014 continues to affect everyone involved.
Yeah, it's a heavy reminder that even though we're talking about the details of this case, we're talking about real people whose lives have been changed forever by this tragic event.
That's right. And as we try to understand this complex case, it's important to have these conversations with empathy, understanding, and a willingness to learn from what happened. This case makes us confront difficult questions about the internet's influence, how powerful beliefs can be, and how crucial it is to be aware of and support mental health. It challenges us to think about personal responsibility, how society is structured, and the ethics of online content, especially when that content blurs the line between fantasy and reality and could have terrible consequences.
It's a lot to think about, and this deep dive has definitely left me with more questions than answers, but it's been valuable nonetheless. It's a story that sticks with you and makes you face some hard truths about the world we live in and the challenges we face as individuals and as a society. It really shows how important it is to think critically, understand what we see in the media, and talk openly about things, especially when it comes to young people and what they're doing online.
Absolutely. This case is like a huge warning sign for parents, teachers, and really all of us to help young people navigate the online world safely and responsibly. We need to be having open and honest conversations with them, about the good and bad that comes with being online, about how to separate fact from fiction, and how online groups, whether good or bad, can really shape what people believe and how they act.
Yeah. And it highlights how important it is to be aware of mental health and have support systems in place. We need to recognize when someone is struggling, whether it's ourselves or someone we care about, and know when and how to get help. We have to get rid of the shame around mental health issues, create spaces where people feel safe talking about their struggles, and make sure that mental health resources are available to everyone, especially young people who might be more vulnerable to the pressures and influences of being online.
You're so right. Getting help early can make all the difference. We need to change the way we think about mental health so it's just as important as physical health, and where asking for help is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness.
This case also brings up some interesting questions about the ethics of creating content online, especially when it involves violence and horror. Where is the line between being creative and potentially causing harm?
That's tough, and there's no easy answer. As content creators, we have a responsibility to think about how our work might affect people, especially younger audiences. We need to be careful about the topics we choose, the stories we tell, and what can happen when we blur the lines between what's real and what's made up.
Right. It's not about censoring people or stifling creativity. It's about being aware and taking responsibility. We need to think about the potential consequences of what we create, especially if it plays on people's deepest fears, deals with disturbing themes, or shows graphic violence.
Exactly. It's about striking that balance between expressing yourself creatively and being ethical, knowing that our creations can have real-life impacts, and doing what we can to prevent any harm.
This deep dive has been a really emotional and thought-provoking experience. As we wrap up our exploration of this case, I'm left with sadness for everyone involved. I'm also in awe of the strength of the human spirit, how people can heal and move forward. And it makes me want to push for greater understanding, awareness, and support when it comes to mental health.
I feel the same way. This case is a reminder that we're all connected, that our choices affect other people, and that it's important to approach difficult conversations with empathy, an open mind, and a willingness to learn and grow.
We hope this deep dive has made you think about the power of the internet, how important mental health awareness is, and the ethics of what we create online. We encourage you to keep these conversations going, to question your own assumptions, and to be an advocate for a more responsible and compassionate online world.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about these complex issues, the better we can navigate them and create a safer, more informed, and more compassionate world for ourselves and for future generations.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Slender Man case. We hope you learned something new and found it thought-provoking. If you like this episode, please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into interesting and complex topics. Stay curious and safe out there.